ever get advice from, say, a consultant, looks good on paper, sounds great in the meeting, but then when you actually try to put it into practice, well, it just falls apart.
Happens all the time, right?
All the time. And that right there is Nassim Taleb's skin in the game concept.
Or arguably lack thereof.
Exactly. And that's what today's deep dive on his book, Skin in the Game, is all about. So we'll unpack this idea, its wisdom, go beyond just what it means, but how you can actually use it.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating about Taleb's work is that he takes these ideas, like skin in the game, that seem so simple on the surface, but then when you really dig in, there's this surprising depth.
Like with our consultant example, they kind of walk away unscathed, but you're the one dealing with the consequences.
Exactly. And that, right there, that's the asymmetry that Taleb really wants us to pay attention to.
Okay, so it's not just about incentives, like most people think of when they think about skin in the game.
Right. Most people think it's just about incentives, but he goes beyond that. It's about symmetry. It's about making sure that those who benefit from a decision are also exposed to the potential harm.
So not just carrots, but sticks as well.
Precisely. It's a two-way street, rewards and consequences. Because that's what drives, that accountability. That's what makes people honest. It's what drives them to actually learn from their mistakes.
And one of the examples that he illustrates in the book is the Bob Rubin trade, right? Where you've got a former U.S. Treasury Secretary making millions from Citibank, but when it nearly collapses in 2008...
Right, no repercussions for him.
Zero. Taxpayers bail out the bank, he keeps his millions.
It's a perfect example of what happens when you decouple risk from reward.
Which, let's be honest, happens way too often.
All the time, sadly.
So how do you fix that? I mean, Taleb talks about how systems learn and improve by removing these actors, right? Like, he uses the example of a bad pilot.
Exactly. Like a pilot who makes consistently bad decisions is not going to be flying for very long.
Right.
So their removal from the system actually makes flying safer for everyone.
So it's kind of like
It's a natural selection.
Yeah.
It's weeding out those dangerous elements to create a more robust system.
So those who take risks and bear the consequences, they're the ones that are actually moving things forward.
They're the ones who have skin in the game. Exactly.
They're the ones who have skin in the game. Okay, so speaking of skin in the game, Taleb says surgeons should not look like surgeons.
Right.
What's that even mean?
Well, he's getting at this idea, what he calls the green lumber fallacy, which is this idea that we often mistake, visible surface level knowledge for true expertise. You ever meet someone who, they can recite all the facts and figures about a topic?
They're like a walking encyclopedia.
Exactly. But then when it comes to actually applying that knowledge in the real world, they fall short.
So they look the part, but they can't actually walk the walk.
Exactly. And, Taleb actually tells this great story about this trader he knew who made a fortune in green lumber. But it turned out the guy had no idea what green lumber was. He thought it was lumber painted green. He didn't realize it was freshly cut wood, but he was making all this money because of his intuition and risk-taking, not because of this technical knowledge.
That's kind of amazing. So the real experts, the ones who actually have skin in the game, might not have those fancy degrees or fit the stereotype.
Exactly. Think about it in your own area of expertise.
Right.
Are there times when, maybe not looking the part is actually an advantage? Because it might mean that you had to develop this much deeper, less conventional understanding in order to succeed.
It's like you have to prove yourself in a different way.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's a good reminder for all of us to look beyond just appearances. Don't be swayed by fancy titles. Look for that evidence of real-world experience, a track record of success. Okay, so we're talking about experts, but then Taleb goes on to say that the world is often ruled by minorities, not majorities. How does that work?
Yeah, it's kind of a mind-bending idea, right?
Totally.
But it all comes down to this power of asymmetry. He calls it the minority rule. And we've all probably experienced it firsthand, right? Like, you're with a group of friends, you're trying to decide where to go to dinner, and you end up at this restaurant that you didn't even want to go to because one person was really insistent.
Oh, I've been there.
Right. That's the minority rule in action.
One person being really stubborn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it happens on much larger scales, too.
Right.
Think about, how a small vocal group can influence product design or even shift cultural norms because they have these really strong convictions, and that can have this outsized impact, especially in a world where, let's be honest, companies, organizations, they're so hyper-aware of social pressure.
They want to please the loudest voices.
Exactly.
So it's not always about the numbers then. It's about like the intensity of the conviction.
Exactly.
Like a small group of really passionate advocates can sometimes get a lot more done than a larger, less engaged majority.
Precisely.
Interesting. So this actually connects to another big idea in Taleb's work, which is this difference between virtue signaling and genuine virtue.
Oh, yeah.
Break that down for me.
So we've all seen it, right? People posting about causes online, but then not actually changing their behavior. That's virtue signaling.
Right.
It's like you're showcasing your moral beliefs for social approval, but you're not actually taking any meaningful action. And Taleb is arguing that true virtue, genuine virtue, is demonstrated through actions,
Right.
often at a cost and often even when no one is watching.
So where does this all fit in with rationality? I mean, aren't we always told to make the rational decision?
Well, that's kind of the classical view, but Taleb, he has a different take.
Okay.
He says that true rationality, especially when you're dealing with the real world, with all of its uncertainty and complexity, that true rationality is really about survival first and foremost.
Survival above all else.
Above all else. He's got this great line in the book. He says, survival comes first, truth, understanding, and science later. Because, you can't be rational if you're not around to be rational.
Yeah, it's true, yeah. If you're not in the game, you can't play.
Exactly. You got to be in the game to play. And this is where he brings in this concept of ergodicity, which sounds really complicated.
It does.
But it's actually not that bad. Just imagine, like a high-frequency trader
Okay.
making thousands of bets a day. Each individual bet might have, like, very, very small risk.
Okay.
But if they're not careful about their overall exposure, one bad day, and they can be completely wiped out.
Out of the game.
Out of the game. That's ergodicity in action.
So are you saying, like, even if the odds seem small in any one instance, if you keep repeating that risk over and over again, eventually,
Yeah, you're going to hit that bad outcome.
it's going to catch up to you.
Exactly. And this is something that, traditional ideas of rationality, they often miss this long-term perspective. They don't account for what Taleb calls the absorbing barrier of ruin, where it's like once you hit that point,
Yeah.
it's game over. You don't get to come back. So you can't just reset the clock.
There's no rewind.
No rewind.
So that's why this idea of skin in the game is so important, because it forces you to think about those long-term consequences. It makes you really evaluate, okay, what's the potential downside here?
Exactly. Because it's not just playing with numbers on a screen. It's your life, it's your well-being, your future. And this actually leads us to Taleb's really, I think, quite provocative closing thought in the book. He argues that true freedom often comes not from security, but from embracing a bit of risk, from becoming your own master.
So it's about taking ownership, even if that means, stepping outside of your comfort zone a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's recognizing the uncertainty is always going to be there, but we can choose how we respond to it. We can take responsibility for our choices, for our decisions. And you know what? Sometimes that means taking risks.
Well, I think this has been a fascinating deep dive into skin in the game. It's definitely given me a lot to think about in terms of just navigating all these hidden asymmetries that are out there, where we have skin in the game, where we don't, and how that really influences our decisions.
Absolutely. And how understanding those dynamics, understanding where we stand, where other people stand, it allows us to, hopefully make more informed decisions, more authentic decisions, more aligned with our own values.
So to our listeners out there, where do you have skin in the game? Where could embracing a little bit of risk lead to more freedom, lead to more fulfillment in your life? That's something to ponder. And until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.